This is the Gospel Revolution.
Since you're knocking on the door, you're begging to come in, yeah. Unaware that all the while love's been knocking from within. You are the love you seek, a perfect yet unique, righteous, holy. Yeah.
Here's the founder and president of the Gospel Revolution, Michael Lilborn Williams.
I'm so glad for my middle name. I used to be lost in a sea of Michael Williamses.
I was just watching football the other night, and there was a player by the name of Mike Williams.
I know, and a good-looking guy also. I mean, some people know we got to carry on the family name properly. But yes, this is Michael Lilborn Williams, and I hated my name all through oh my gosh. The one thing nobody knew in school was what my middle name. I refused to let anybody know what my middle name was. I never dreamed that it would be the keys to the kingdom as far as being able to help people identify this Michael Williams and the Gospel Revolution from the politicians, the preachers, the football players that are Michael Williams. So, when you are talking to people and you want to introduce them to something about the Gospel Revolution, and they don't, they're not going to write down the website or something, just tell them, just Google Michael Lilborn Williams, and that takes them to everything gospel. So we are happy to be with you. Listen, we've got something that's happened today, happened this week. Many of our listeners know that Ethan spent some time here right after he got out of the military, and last year, and he went to Las Vegas. He's attended school there, and has finished up, and he has come back to Tennessee. So guess who we have with us today?
Hello.
How about that?
Well, hello, Ethan.
Howdy, Daniel.
Welcome back to
Hi, Michael.
welcome back to the Room of Rooms.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, that's where we are, the Room of Rooms. So yeah, this has been a real wonderful change. Now, some of you will be hearing this and say, "Oh, I heard about that 2 weeks ago." But that's just how far ahead we are at the moment. I don't mean to burst our own bubble here, but the progression of this research has. We are. I don't know. Where are we? Is this number 18 or something?
17 or 18.
My goodness, and no end in sight.
Yeah.
Did you say that's true?
I do not see the end in sight. No.
I don't either. In fact, I see it broadening and still remaining within this focus of the 1,000-year reign. And we're going to be explaining to you today why that parameter is so vitally important in understanding the gospel, and why that 1,000-year reign must be understood along with other parameters that God himself set for us to understand all this easily. It's easily understood. We are going to be sharing things with you today that according to ChatGPT, just last night, Daniel, I asked ChatGPT on the last part of this that you are aware of. I asked how many people, teachers or ministries, had taught this perspective of what we'll be speaking of in the later part of this. How many people have taught this? And ChatGPT got totally convinced that we were absolutely correct about it. It'll tell you that also. And you know how many they came up with that has taught on this in history?
Zilch?
0. Nobody. On one of the most taught on subjects in Christendom of the prophecies. And we'll be going into that, but you will be hearing for the first time in history. And That's crazy. I mean, it's just crazy. You will wonder how in the world this perspective has never been taught before, because you're going to see it's the only logical one there.
Mm.
Because once it gets into Christianity and goes into the blender, oh dear Lord, the interpretations that all take away from the cross. And guess what? This interpretation, this view, this understanding, simply accepting what we read within the parameters we've been given to read it, all point to Christ.
Mm. You know, Michael, and you were doing a little sidebar, which really feeds into that, and that is, you discovered a teaching from the Apostle Paul that really clarifies why these disputes, why these questions, why this searching continues on in Christianity, is because they are missing one thing. They're missing the end.
Mm-hmm.
And
they're missing the end. That's incredible.
They just go on and on. I mean, we see that with the 70 weeks of Daniel, is they put the whole, some of them agree that all the 69 weeks is history. And then there's a big pause button that happens. And we have just, I mean, it's so clear that all of that leads us to the cross. Same thing with the 1,000-year reign of Christ. They accept certain facts about the 1,000-year reign of Christ that's already complete, but yet there's a future fulfillment yet to happen. And Michael, I think the same thing is happening with genealogies and these historical stories. We've looked at a few of them just in the last few weeks by looking at the Antichrist. We've looked at the little horn and historically speaking, who that person could be. Last week, we looked at the prince who is to come. That was very clearly mistaken as being someone other than Christ, because right there in the verse, it said that he would be a Messiah. And it's not another individual. So Christianity has put a big pause on this. And you know what? Paul had something to say about that.
You know that Paul, I have to apologize to Paul.
Apologize to Paul.
I do. I have to apologize to my sweet brother Paul. And everybody knows that the thing that is clear when I teach is people know what my paradigm is. They know what is the length and breadth of where we're studying. This is where it starts and this is where it ends. If you don't have a place where it starts and where it ends, then you don't have a story. A story has to have a start and it has to have an end. And so we've done that. And one of the things that I had really sweet people were publishing this material now that they tried to tell me 2 or 3 decades ago that Paul was chosen by God. Well, now you guys know that I have skated, tripped over all of these things about Paul being specially chosen by God because it was after the cross. Well, finally, my dumb head accepted that Paul was chosen before the cross and was chosen before he was in his mother's womb. Do you know that there's only Paul and Jeremiah, and then we've got John the Baptist leaping at 6 months of gestation and to his mother's pregnancy. And other than that, there's no claims of pre-knowledge. Now, people spread that to all the human race, but these are the only two who claim a pre-knowledge of their ministry. Now, we know that everything was predestined before the cross, and so we understand that. But I saw Paul as an after the cross figure because he had an after the cross experience. But it turns out that these claims, and it got difficult stumbling over Paul being so direct about, I know who you guys are, but God doesn't care who you are. I'm chosen of God. And I've just recently went through the beginning of all of Paul's letters, and they all state that, well, just like this one, that's in First Timothy. I was just able to go through this, Daniel. It's very brief, and I do know now that at least one of the letters, the T letters that we didn't go into at all on the pseudegraphicals, but I did find that First Timothy chapter 1, verse 1 through 15, I'm really convinced was Paul. You've looked over it also, and and Ethan has looked at this too. But I've gone into quite a bit of detail about it, and you can see, and then I've worked with just identifying the difference, and ChatGPT shows that the Greek changes, the sentence structure changes, the length of the sentences, the comparative teaching ends in verse 15. It's just amazing. But anyway, and I find Paul's teachings there up to verse 15. And then you find the same old stuff, and now I beseech you type stuff that follows up in verse 16. So Paul starts this out, just to give you a little taste. I'm going to be teaching on this on Tuesdays. I know I've been absent on Tuesdays, but this is going to become a series that we're going to go through. All right, so First Timothy starts out, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the commandment of God. Okay. By the commandment of God, our Savior, and the Lord Jesus Christ, which is our hope. So even in this introduction, and many of them, Paul says, I'm called, I've been, God picked me to know the mystery above all people. So I finally got it. I got it. Okay, Paul, you were the vessel that was there to receive the mystery. It's quite obvious the disciples were not chosen to receive the mystery. They were there. They were chosen by God to basically prove what couldn't be done. And then after the work of the cross, they are extending everything because they think that this earthly kingdom, which was the progression of Daniel, as we will see today, all of these prophecies had a switch in kingdoms, and then God's kingdom is always promised that it's going to come. So they were fully expecting an earthly kingdom. So we have Paul. I can agree or disagree all day long. I can say Paul was a special vessel called to receive the mystery exclusively. I can agree or disagree. But Paul was totally convinced that he was chosen specifically to receive the mystery of the gospel exclusive. He had an exclusive on the gospel. So I accept that, and I'm actually excited about it because it helps us understand so much why we're dealing with the dumb bunnies, right?
Right.
Lisa McPeak reminded me that I call them dumb bunnies. But so why the dumb bunnies? Well, because they were dumb bunnies. That they were selected for this particular role, and Paul was selected for this one. I don't understand exactly why yet, but we do know that it took 3 years, apart from the disciples, for Christ to bring this mystery to full understanding to Paul. And the disciples never got the 2.0 of the gospel. They just got the ministry of Christ, and that was it. All right. So as we go down through here, so I'm going to be teaching more on that. I want to help people see this along with our friends, Brad Crooks and also Robert May, who we are just publishing this article of. These are the guys who tried to point this out to me 20 to 30 years ago. And, I smiled. I thought it was nice of them to share, but I just had no readiness to listen. I did realize Paul had something that none of the rest did, but to say he had it by the will of God, separately, exclusively, called by God, because after the cross, we understand that we are all called of God. We are all equal. We're not God doesn't specially call anybody to do anything. Even as we've told people even about the ministry and support, God doesn't support anybody's ministry. God's not for or against anybody. The entire concept of reward and punishment are gone. A lot of people are really glad that the concept of punishment is gone. You see, you can't take away the concept of punishment unless it also goes with it its counterpart, and that is reward. So our reward has already been given. That the reward is Christ. We're all there. So anyway, Paul goes on into this, and I'm just going to jump down, and because later on we'll go through all these verses. And he's comparing his teaching to theirs. And he's giving them some concerns about what they have been teaching these people. And then in verse 4, it says, now here's some things you need to watch out for. He said, don't give heed to fables. So the word fable means fiction. These tales, these myths. He said, you're going to get trapped in myths. Or mysticism, maybe. But he said, don't get trapped in myths. There's people talking about everything. And he connected it to this, and to endless genealogies. And I'm sure a lot of people would say, oh boy, Mike, I bet that didn't sit well with you. You're into this endless genealogy. You study genealogy. I've got my 9th great-grandmother's here on the wall looking at my face right now. And a portrait of her. Okay. I don't want to be that big mistake. But the endless genealogies, that caught my attention. He says, now these endless genealogies, what do? They minister questions. Now, what they do is they create, and the term questions just means disputes and searching. It just creates a searching. When you have something about endless genealogies, it creates this searching, an unnecessary searching, as Paul is stating this here, rather than godly edifying, which is in faith. So Paul's saying that edification comes from knowing what is in faith, not your faith. Of course, Paul taught us about the faith of Christ and the faith of God. But everything that we need to understand is revealed in the faith, not in what faith will do, but in what faith has done. So when he talks about endless genealogies, the definition of that word for us is unfinished. Unfinished genealogies.
Wow.
My goodness, when I realized what Paul was saying here, because goodness, when we have gone through the 1,000-year reign, we've come to the termination of genealogies, right?
Yeah.
We look at Matthew, and remember how we started the genesis of genealogies of Christ? So Christ has several genesis of his genealogy. Those two mentioned in Matthew are Abraham, the genesis of the Christ in Abraham, and the genesis of Christ in Moses. So we get all the way down to this point then, and there is an ending, a finishing to the genealogy. And the genealogy that was finished was Adam's genealogy.
You're preaching. Preach, brother.
Adam's genealogy ended. It ended. And if you don't know that Adam's genealogy ended, it's going to lead to searchings.
Wow.
Searching, what do you do with the old man? What do you do with sin? What do you do with righteousness? What do you do with end time teaching? What do you do about this? What do you do about that? What about the 70 weeks of Daniel? Where's that in? And where's the 1,000 years reign? Where's that? but all of these searchings that are being done because of an inconclusive end. You got to know where the end is. You got to know what is finished. And when Jesus said, "Tetelestai," it is finished. Here Paul is saying, your problem is you're dealing with unfinished things, unfinished genealogies, unfinished prophecies, unfinished righteousness, unfinished sin. Everything Paul was trying to help the church to focus on was you got to know what's finished first. If you don't know what's done, how do you know what to do next?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you become mistaken about where the finish line is, how are you going to know when you cross it? You don't even know. And that's the thing that Paul taught us, man. We've been brought across the finish line. We're past that. The Adamic age is finished. The law is finished. The old covenant is finished. So this term "endless" here is quite amazing. And he points directly at the term genealogies. As we've been going through this, the 70 weeks of Daniel, the 70 weeks of Daniel is contained within the 1,000-year reign, right? Mm. So the genealogy or the length of time of this 1,000-year reign that we have been going through has a finish point. It has a tetelestai. And if you miss the tetelestai of genealogies, how about the tetelestai of sin? How about the tetelestai of righteousness? How about the tetelestai of prophecy? See, if you miss the tetelestai, you miss Christ. Mm. That means what you're involved in has nothing to do with Christ at all. If you're trying to get God to do things for you today, you are trying to get something outside of it is finished. What we live with and live in and who we are and what we are together, one in God, in Christ, and each other, we live in tetelestai. We're not looking for God to do something. He did it. Mm-hmm. The kingdom of God has come. It is here. It's not something to be grasped for. That's what the incredible revelation of us being one with God, what does that mean? Paul explained it in detail that Christ, being in the form of God, did not count it robbery to be equal with God. So he did not count equality with God something he had to grasp for. If you don't see the finish of all things, you will be grasping for tetelestai. You'll be grasping for what you already have. Mm. So this incredible insight from Paul about this, I don't know why. I mean, when I read across this and then I clicked on and saw the term endless, it just means unfinished. Unfinished genealogy. And if there's anything that the Gospel Revolution is about, one of its main focuses is about what is finished. And now we need to conceive and accept that humanity was finished. The Adamic race was finished. I think it was Robert May, or one of our guys, was talking to me about the statement that we had made, Daniel, when we were talking about when Christ died in the end of the Adamic age. And we talked about that God breathed into Adam the breath of life. And then when Christ breathed out, that was the end of the Adamic age. That same breath of life that came into Adam, that animated Adam, that breath of life that animated Adam was exhaled by Christ. What animates us is not that same breath that went into Adam. What animates us is Christ himself. Mm-hmm. In him we live and move and have our being. Yeah. That's what you call being animated, right? Mm. So what animated Adam? What animated Adam was the breath of God. Jesus breathed that breath out and Adam died. And then the humanity, what we became, what happened at that point, as that breath went out, we were united with God and God with us and Christ and God. And there is no division. There is no separation. And that we do not live by the breath of God. We live by the life of Christ.
Mm.
We are animated. I don't care who it is or what they're doing. If you have life, you're animated by Christ.
Woohoo! Preach it, brother.
Somebody approved there. I don't know what it was.
So it sounds like in order to understand the start and finish of genealogy, we need to understand our history.
Mm.
We need history. Yeah, if we're going to understand our spirituality, we're going to have to understand our history.
Mm.
This is one thing Ethan and I were going into, is that what Christianity has done is they have separated the history from the spirituality, right?
Yeah.
And then what historians have done is they have separated the spiritual from the historical. So the series that we just watched is my second time through it is Alexander. We're going to be recommending that to you later on for a very good reason. But as we were looking at that and seeing how that these historians separated the spiritual from this story. So they speculated about what Alexander was doing and when he was doing it. And if you read Daniel, it was God that instituted Alexander to do what he did the way he did. And there was a reason that Alexander the Great was the Great. And man, when you hear the story and the detail, I mean, everything he did was, quote, biblical.
Mm-hmm.
Goodness gracious. I mean, from start to finish, unbelievable. I mean, if one of those things would have happened in anybody's life, one thing, it would have made them famous around the world for all of time. But with him, I mean, it happened every day, every time he turned around.
And the statistics and probability would agree with you.
So what did the statistics, Ethan, I know that you checked to see what is, this is a wonderful thing about AI, it can do the numbers, right? So what Ethan did was of course, AI knows the history of Alexander, but he let it know if we consider these and prompted it to consider that and all of Alexander. So you ask AI, what is the probability that this happened just by chance?
Well, if you can took into consideration all the battles that were fought and the sheer numbers of the Persian army to the Greek army, then including the pilgrimage through the desert to go to these battles and to the four corners of this empire prophesied in Daniel, all those circumstances calculated together, it would be a 0.00039% chance of success.
Yeah, it's not possible, right? So what you see in watching this and knowing the history of Alexander the Great was that this Greek Empire, this was set up by God. It is part of the genealogy of Christ, as far as the genealogy of the prophecies, to bring us to a finished work, a totally finished work. Oh my gosh, it is finished. It is finished. Why in the world did Jesus choose those terms of all the terms that he could say right before he died? It is finished. And folks, like I said, if we've shouted anything from the housetop and that's the reason I had a hard time including Paul, because it was finished. And until I understood that Paul's calling happened before the cross, then I finally was able to see that this really is true. Paul really was called to receive this magnificent mystery of the gospel of Jew and Gentile being with God.
You know, Michael, this adventure that we've been on
really is merging every fractal of the gospel that we've learned to this point is really intersecting in understanding the 1,000-year reign of Christ. For instance, I'm looking back now at you guys just talking about Alexander the Great and this predestined plan. Predestination falls into place. Prophecy falls into place. All of these things fall into place in this timeline of, specifically as we're talking now, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And we talked a couple weeks ago about this little horn, and we brought up about Herod, the Herods that we learned about, and understood their role. But all of that understanding needs to be understood that it was predestined, that this was all of these biblical characters, all these characters in Daniel were predestined to be where they were, to do what they did in order to bring us to Christ. And you look at Nebuchadnezzar, you look at Alexander the Great, you look at all of the kings of Israel, all of the princes, and all of these who played a role, the prophets, the priests, and everybody played a role in the predestined plan, and their genealogies were predetermined.
Their names
were predetermined. Everything was predetermined to happen when it happened, in the way that it happened, in order to bring us to Christ.
Well, we were funneled in. I always remember when I looked up that the love of God constraineth us. And I'm telling you, I preached on it, others preached on it. It's like, oh, the love of God keeps us from doing wrong. You know?
Yeah.
I read restraineth. And but that it doesn't say the love of God restraineth, it constraineth. And the picture that Greek word paints is that of a funnel. It constrains all of us. The love of God sends us all through the same path. Oh my gosh, it is just so beautiful. Is the all-encompassing fulfillment of this bringing us to Christ. And Christianity has turned this whole thing around of how God brought us to Christ, and we've got people trying to come to Christ.
Yeah,
it's like you built this thing upside down. But see, all of God's kingdom was upside down to man's thinking. Even this image that we're going to go into seems rather upside down, because the most vulnerable part of this vision that Nebuchadnezzar had was its feet. You know, you'd think you want your feet to be the strongest part. You got to have a good foundation under you, right?
Yeah.
And you got to have those feet strong, the legs strong, and, you know, you can be as weak-brained as you want, and you can still, you know, fight a good battle. But that image, as we're going to go through here in a bit, comes down to a very fragile. The feet are very fragile, and that is the part that we're going to go into that nobody's ever taught on in the history of the world. You do not want to turn this program off. You are going to hear something that has never been taught according to all the research we can do. We cannot find one preacher, teacher, Bible school, scholar for the last 2,000 years that has taught on this. Now, Ethan and I agree. We think that they probably did teach on it during the first 100, 200 years after the cross. But by the time Catholicism got a hold of this and began to extricate the possibilities that everything was finished at the cross, I mean, this was a concerted effort. By adding to Paul's teachings, as we've gone through with pseudographical writings, by taking out books that I'm beginning to learn from Ethan, possibly taken out of the Hebrew scriptures, removed because it explained too much. But this, just like with this vision, I think everybody that ever went to Bible school or Sunday school, learned about Nebuchadnezzar and his vision of the giant, you know, this man, you know, that starts out with gold at the top, and you got the feet of iron and clay at the bottom. And Ethan turned on Perry Stone for a minute for me. And
Oh, I'm
it's
sorry.
like, I know.
How dare you
Oh
do that to
Lord,
him?
yeah. This is elder abuse here. So I did listen, and my God, you talk about the confused mess of trying to find where the toes are, and they're the European Union. And I remember, Daniel, as they were teaching that back in the 80s, and the European Union finally went to 10 members. And everybody was, oh my God, there it is. There's the 10 toes. And then before a couple of years was out, they added somebody else to the European. Now we've got 11 toes. And I don't know how many toes are on theirs. But I guarantee you the one prophet that was in the vision of Nebuchadnezzar has 10 toes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bottom line.
And I think that would be evidence to what you were telling me last night. The preachers are removing the history from the spiritual.
Yes, they are removing the history of this. To be able to do that, as Ethan was reminding me, is that they are removing the history from the spiritual.
Mm.
That way you can interpret the spiritual any way you want to.
Yeah.
And historians, that's why history is in such conflict with spiritual, and spiritual is in such conflict with history, is because they don't realize they are one and the same, and one holds the other together with the other. You cannot define spirituality outside of history, and you cannot define history outside of spirituality.
Mm.
That's why we have endless genealogies.
That's why we have endless genealogies, is because nobody has accepted the fulfillment of spirituality or the fulfillment of history as far as that's concerned. God's role in history is fulfilled. The spiritual role of history is done.
Mm.
The United States is not part of the book of Daniel or Jeremiah or Ezekiel. The bear to the north is not the Soviet Union. Oh my God, come off of it, folks. And we'll have it all the way down to where that Alabama is the silver arm in the dream. This is crazy. I mean, it's just that nuts, because our current situation is fluid. This is changing. It's just like they only had a couple of years to grab a hold of 10 toes. After 2,000 years, they finally get 10 toes on their vision that Nebuchadnezzar had. And it didn't even last for a couple of years till there was another toe added. It's like, no, those toes were defined by God. We should not be looking at this and defining what we think the gold is. What do we think the silver is? What do we think the bronze is? What do we think the iron is? What do we think the iron and the clay is? We should be accepting what God said it was. Do you know God had an opinion in all this? It's just, but I don't know, no. We can't listen to God. We have to come up with our own. There's that guy again manifesting here. That's my theologian. So yeah, I mean, it's quite amazing.
So all of this, Michael, we have been working the last month or so out of the book of Daniel. And as we examine the book of Daniel, we're learning more and more each and every week, and we're able to come back with more and more information for you guys. And one of the things that we noticed here recently is understanding the historical account that Daniel brings, as well as the prophetic. And you see, this book is almost split in half, with half of it being the history, what Daniel experienced as one who was born in Jerusalem, in Judah, and then going to Babylon, and then all of this prophetic that sprouted out of their return back to Jerusalem. See, Daniel lived through that time. But then there was the prophetic time of this other 490 weeks that you see being told of and prophesied about in the final chapters of Daniel. moving on from like chapter 7 and going forward. And Michael, it is amazing to see for us now, it's not prophetic.
Yeah.
For Daniel, chapter 7, 8, 9, and on was prophetic. For us, it's not prophetic. That prophetic has become fulfilled and now is historical. So that's a beautiful thing about what we're able to do now is to go into this beautiful prophecy of the 70 weeks of Daniel and to look at it not as what's going to happen with the European Union, what's going to happen with Russia, what's going to happen, or Alabama, what's going to happen with anybody. What we're able to see is all of this did take place, and it is amazing to the detail in which it took place.
The most minute detail. It's I'm embarrassed, Daniel. And then I hear what you and Ethan were taught about this, and it's like, oh my God, I actually missed that part of it. And I mean, but anything more you hear about it, it just gets more ridiculous. It becomes more unending and endless.
Yeah.
There's nothing that gives Christ any glory in any of this. What does Christ have anything to do with the European Union? What is that? How is that bringing us to Christ?
Right.
It's just ignorance. Let me call it what it is. Please, may I call it ignorance?
Yes, please.
And may I also call it stupidity?
Yes, thank you.
Because Christianity, stupidity, we've gone over this before, ignorance is ignoring the facts. Choosing to ignore the facts. That's ignorance. Stupidity means you don't have the ability to learn it. Christianity makes you stupid. Now, I'm not saying that just to be offensive. I realize it is offensive. Give me a break. But I'm saying it as a reality because that what they have been taught has prevented them from being able to learn. That's stupid, right?
Yeah.
And in many cases, the people who are teaching this stuff are ignorant because they're ignoring the facts. The people have been made stupid by hearing the ignorance because they just simply are not being told the truth about these prophecies. And these guys, goodness, you should have heard Perry Stone rocking and rolling and reading through this. And but what he was saying was ignorance. Now, when we teach on this in the 1,000-year reign, people, I've been trying this on Facebook. Okay, so what about if maybe since death, according to 1 Corinthians, since that was, Paul said that that's where death was defeated, and the end of the 1,000-year reign, according to Revelation, ends when death is defeated. Maybe the end of the 1,000-year reign happened at the cross, not the beginning. No. Bam. Doors closed. Kicked out. What is that? What is that causes people to be unable to learn? It's called stupidity. There's something in their brain that's made them stupid. There's something there that's made them stupid. And I'm not using those terms to be offensive. Those are offensive terms, but they're also real terms. There is something of outside of just trying to insult them. There is a term for a stupor. The term stupid comes from stupor. That means you're just totally unable to learn. You're in a stupor. The stupor, God put stupid. Remember, we even titled one of the shows that. God put stupid on Israel, right? So that's nothing to be ashamed of if God gave you stupid. The disciples had stupid on them. And I don't know what part of that was because they were ignorant, ignoring the facts. I don't know. But stupid, but they got to the point it seems that they were unable to learn. They certainly heard from Paul and his teaching, but they were unable to hear Paul. They just simply were unable to hear him. They gave a tip of the hat, a nod of the head to Paul. because they didn't know what the hell to do with him. But did they ever say they agreed with Paul? Honey, that is not in there. And does Paul ever say he agreed with them? That's not in there. You'd have to go searching and create another endless thing to try to say that was there. So what we have then is this 1,000-year. Let me make it clear that the 490 years, the 70 weeks of Daniel lived inside the 1,000-year reign. Daniel occupied kind of the middle of the 1,000-year reign. Would you say that that's right, Ethan? Yeah. How about you, Daniel? He was kind of in the middle of it.
I concur.
All right. So, but we want you to keep the picture here in place so that you don't have to be stupid. See, we are accepting what God says about these things. Now, we went through the little horn. Now, let me explain something about the term horn. So we're going to study about the horns again today, all right? But the term horn in Daniel's visions are authorities, positions, kings. Ethan, what was that definition that you found about it? Do you remember it? It's the power.
Power.
Yeah. The term horn means the point of power. And so you can use the term horn, and Daniel did this throughout his visions, even though he was talking about a completely different segment of history. So the segment of history that we covered that went all the way to the cross, through Herod the Great, and then the three little horns. And then out of the three little horns, there actually were two. Our preterist friends have gone with the one that came off to the right. And then the gospel, though, sticks with the one that's down to the left, which was Herod's namesake. And that brings us right straight to the cross. And even if you take the other name, which I can't remember it, but it's the one that that our preterist friends used to describe as the little horn. And remember, we're only having to go through this because people are calling this the Antichrist. What we're trying to show you, this is history that has nothing to do with the Antichrist. It has to do with the Christ. And so we have taken so many verses that are about the Christ, and we made it the Antichrist. Mm-hmm. Just like the abomination of desolation, the abomination standing in the holy place and making desolate. Oh, that's the Antichrist. The other things, we found that the term, it tells us it's talking about the Savior. And they take that prince and turn him into the Antichrist. So we don't want to be ignorant of the facts. Because if you think you know something and you don't really know it, you become stupid. That means you cannot hear truth. Now, how do I know stupid? I've been stupid. I am absolutely convinced there's things that I'm still stupid. I stayed stupid about Paul because I had a concept that was incorrect. My concept about Paul being able to be called specifically chosen separately from anybody else on earth was wrapped up in a predetermination that I had about everything ending at the cross. That was true. But you see, what I was ignorant of was that Paul's calling came before the cross. Once I cleared up my ignorance, I stopped being stupid. I was able to see, and now every place I look, just like 1 Timothy chapter 1, every letter Paul starts says, hey, sorry about that. No, he doesn't say sorry about that. I'm chosen, you're not. This mystery was given to me, not to you. We may not believe Paul was chosen, but the one thing you cannot say is that Paul did not believe that Paul was chosen. Specifically for this ministry, he says it was given to him by Christ personally. I may not believe he was called, but Paul believed he was called. And according to statements that are attributed to Christ, Christ knew he was called. So it makes no difference what I thought. But I wanted to point that out to you. See, when I call people stupid, I'm including myself. We're not disconnected from each other. If one person is stupid, we're probably all stupid. So we have to understand, and Ethan and I have been talking about this interdependency that we have, that we're all dependent on each other. In Him we live and move and have our being. The statement itself speaks of our interdependency. So the power of changing your mind, Daniel, hasn't that been? You tell me about this. You tell people what it's been like for you to step into an arena where you can learn.
Let's just take Daniel, for example. Let Daniel use Daniel. This book of Daniel in Christianity was taught to me. You see these figures of, this man with the golden head and the feet of clay and all of that. And that was taught to me as a future fulfillment and all of that.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Features.
And you get the 70 weeks of Daniel. That's something that's yet to happen. At least that last week it's coming. Part of this is fulfilled. Part of it's not. All of these images of the bear and the eagle and all of that are all nations that are to come and to rise up and to have their place in the end time. Now, being able to learn and to realize and understand that there's a historical aspect to this, and understanding that prophecy is fulfilled, you have to be in a mindset of learning, because these are all new concepts to my mind. And these are things that I have never understood in Christianity. And you open up the book of Daniel, I would venture to say that 99% of people who open up to the book of Daniel have no clue what they're reading. And it's the same thing with Revelation, because you have all of this imagery that's painted. Yeah. Same thing with Ezekiel. You have all of this. And to be honest with you, a year or two ago, I open up the book of Daniel and all this stuff, and I see it, and I'm like, what? Huh? A bear with an eagle head and all of this kind of crazy stuff.
Right.
But when you're able to learn and sit down and learn and to realize that all of these have a historical aspect to it, and you overlay history with the prophecy and understand that all of this was preordained and called by God. All of these people were called by God. The powers that be were called of God. The powers that be are today are not called of God. We just are.
Profound.
And you overlay that, and all of a sudden now you can open the book of Daniel. And the three of us spent an hour and a half on the phone yesterday just looking at Daniel. And you know what? It went from something that was so complicated. You got to do this, you got to see that, and this is a picture of that. And this is it's not something that you have to like paint between the lines. It is crystal clear that this is history. It's crystal clear who the characters are when you understand history. And when you understand the play of the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, when you understand the history that all of those played within this period of time, it's all easy to understand. And that experience has been absolutely mind-blowing. And I really do sit back and think, I really was stupid.
Yeah.
It really is coming out of darkness into the light, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
And I'm in the same boat with you, Daniel. I didn't know anything about, of course, I knew the story of the statue with many elements, but I was taking the history out of it.
Yeah.
None of it.
You're spiritualizing history.
Yes.
Based on things I was told in children's church, in youth groups, in Sunday service.
Mm-hmm.
And last night, I'm just now learning the historical context.
And we've learned the entire context from head to toe.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it explains itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's so ridiculous about it all.
Yeah.
And man, I tell you, it really is coming out of that. And folks, I've got to use the language I know to use, and I know how offensive it is to use the word stupid and ignorant, but those are applicable terms when it comes to what Paul said. And once you get into unfinished genealogies, you are stupid. You can't learn.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to unfinished sin, you now become stupid. If you get to unfinished righteousness, you now, by accepting the ignorance of that, you now have become stupid and you can't learn. So to say we've got our job cut out for us, I mean, that's an understatement. But the one thing that we do understand, just between us and all of you got GRs out there, I'm telling you, I talk to you guys, many of you I talk to on just an occasional basis, but oh my gosh, the feedback we're getting is so profound, and people calling here and breaking down in tears that have been studying the Bible for decades and been pastors and ministers and evangelists and traveled the world to share the gospel, and they're just now learning it. It's just utterly amazing. So we have this process. I remember I never had a slightest inkling that I would ever understand this image that Nebuchadnezzar had in a dream, I think it says.
And now that I've added the historical element back into this imagery, what I'm starting to see is that these horns actually fit into each of these elements over the span of the 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and they're putting themselves in place. We're not taking a horn and shoving it here or there. We're just looking and seeing where does God say it is?
Mm-hmm.
What does the vision say it is? Do you know the vision explains the vision?
Yeah. Well, Michael, just a couple weeks ago, we looked at this little horn that rose up, and we seen that one of the great horns was Herod the Great. And Michael, after that time, you were walking through the house and you saw a lineage, and it had Herod and Herod's 3 sons.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Daniel talks about, is that the little horn, and when the little horn is there, there'll be 3 places, 3 kings, 3 other horns, if you will, that will be plucked out.
Yeah, I think it's the big horn and then 3 horns under him and then the little horn. Yeah, and and I've got a picture of them on a chart, and this is something Ethan ordered a year or 2 ago, a year and a half ago, and now we've got this entire thing charted out. And so when we read through, all we got to do, we got this big old chart over here, and it's got their pictures and everything, the pictures that have been depicted of them. And there they are. And it's like all 3 of the little horns became kings under Herod the Great the same year Herod died in 4 BCE. So you look at the one of them was a Philip and the other was, I don't remember their names. I'm not going to try to do all that. But all 3 of them has their start dates of ruling their kingdoms, and it says that this under the Great, it breaks up into 3 parts, 3 kings that are, and then so then it goes to the little horn, and that little horn is what brings us right straight up to the cross. And like I said, there is another one that branches off. There's only 2 that could possibly be the little horn, and our preterist friends have gone with that one, but it doesn't even line up with 70 AD.
Mm-hmm.
But because we cannot accept we got endless genealogies. So therefore, we've got to go the direction that the genealogies don't end. You go the other direction and it ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's profound.
And Michael, I believe you were telling me last night that the importance of the horns is not in a specific person.
Yes.
It's not a noun. It's a adjective to describe the role.
It's yeah. In fact, that was you telling me that. We get to where we don't know who told who what, you know. So I mean, it's a learning avalanche that we are in, and goodness gracious. So, and I do want to assure everybody listening, this is, oh my gosh, you don't know, God, the three of us sitting here doing this show. Oh my goodness, you talk about dreams of dreams. Nebuchadnezzar never had a dream as grand as this one. Me sitting with two other people who understood the gospel, that I could go take a break, and you guys would be doing just fine without me. That is success to me. And what a wonderful, wonderful thing to be happening. And like I said, and then we've got so many GRs out there that they could be sitting here doing this. And a lot of them think they can't, but I guarantee you they can. So this historical context of the spiritual, you can't spiritualize history. Neither can you turn history into spiritual. But if you take the timeline of history that defines spiritual, and the spiritual that defines history, you will come up with Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you want to wind up there, folks? I mean, why do you want to wind up at the European Union? Jesus Christ. I mean, you talk about stupid, and that's stupid. And but I've told you I was stupid. I was stupid about Paul. I could not, what does stupid mean? I could not learn what Paul and Jesus both said about his ministry. I couldn't, because I learned something that did not allow me to accept that. So people have described this that I do. They call me the great unteacher, because that's the only way that I've been able to learn, folks, is to unteach or unlearn what I thought I knew.
Mm.
And then you're free to move forward, to at least consider. There's no, gosh, it seems as though people think that changing your mind is a spiritual flaw. And it is not a spiritual flaw. It's not a character flaw to change your mind. Proverbs says only a fool doesn't change your mind. And doesn't use those exact words, but that's Lil Born interpretation. So, guys, where do we go from here?
Let's look at some of this history that's unfolded. Let's take a walk. Let's take a walk through Daniel.
Ooh,
You know, the story of Daniel begins with this interception between Judah and Babylon. In Daniel 1:1, it says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it." And then you see this whole process in which King Nebuchadnezzar now begins to take a role. And this is the introduction that we get to Daniel. And you probably all remember the story growing up in Sunday school about Daniel not bowing to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar made, and he gets thrown into the lion's den. But Daniel really had this play and this role, this predestined role, if you will, with King Nebuchadnezzar. So in this process of being introduced to King Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel and three of his friends, commonly known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we'd like to point out to you that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not their Jewish names. And Daniel also had a name that was not his Jewish name. And that's
Belteshazzar.
Yep. That's in Daniel 1:7. Belteshazzar was a name given to Daniel, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I remember years ago hearing Kenneth Copeland say, "Don't you dare call them Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," because that was not their names.
And that's something. See, I've never heard anybody that knew that.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful that somebody paid close enough attention. And one of the things, let's clear this up, is this the name they tried to give Daniel was Belteshazzar. Now, later on, we have a Belshazzar as king.
Yeah.
So don't confuse those two, because one, the name they tried to give Daniel was Belteshazzar, and the king later that Daniel deals with is Belshazzar.
So Daniel's role with King Nebuchadnezzar was kind of as a servant, and he was the one who brought in his drinks and brought in his food and all that kind of stuff. But one day, King Nebuchadnezzar was troubled because he had this vision, this dream of this statue. And this is the statue that had a head of gold. It had a chest and arms of silver. The belly and thighs were bronze, legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. And because Daniel had distinguished himself above other people and had shown that he had, I think it talked about having wisdom beyond his years, he began to have King Nebuchadnezzar's ear. So King Nebuchadnezzar came to him and said, "Daniel, oh, do you have any understanding about this dream that I had?" And let me just read here a couple verses. He said, "The secret that was revealed to Daniel in the night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven, and Daniel answered and said, 'Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding.'" So this vision is all about these kings arising and these kings coming down. And there's no need to sit and try to interpret what this vision was about because Daniel already interpreted it.
Yes, and it's obvious that these kings had a king over them.
Yes.
Which is what get it, folks. What Daniel just read is about an authority over the authorities. Mm-hmm. And that's where that you get Jesus being described during the 1,000-year reign from Daniel 1:10, verse 1. Is that correct? 1:10:1?
Psalm.
Yes, Psalms 1:10:1 is where he talks about taking the throne, and my Lord said unto my Lord, sit here. Now, you can take that out of its time context, and you're going to have all of this confusion about when the 70 weeks of prophecy begin, or the 1,000-year reign begins. Either one. Yeah, we're talking about 1,000-year reign now. So he makes us understand in Psalms with David. Didn't mean to bring confusion into that, but that is David who had that, and he understood the 1,000-year reign. So what we're trying to do is show you that this 1,000-year span of time, and including the 70 weeks of Daniel, were all under the reign of Christ. Not Yeshua Christ. Yeshua Christ was the incarnation of Christ. But see, there's Christ from Abraham all the way down to the incarnate Christ. There's the Christ who's all the way from Moses all the way to the incarnate Yeshua. But at this point, what we're dealing with is Christ, the anointed. Daniel, I know you went into that term, and it's just so very clear that this is talking about Christ, the same one who manifested as Yeshua.
So in this vision, Daniel goes to explain, because God told him, God spoke to Daniel and said, this is what this dream that I gave to Nebuchadnezzar was. It starts with the head of gold, and he says, point blank, Nebuchadnezzar, this is you. This is the Babylon Empire. And then
isn't that amazing? He told him, you're the gold head.
Yep.
And we've got people out there teaching that the gold is China or the United States or.
And then we see that there are other kingdoms that will rise up, and that's exactly what Daniel said. We have, and history tells us exactly who these empires were that rose up. The chest of arms of silver, the Persian Empire. The belly and the thighs of the bronze, the Greek Empire. The legs of iron, the Roman Empire. And the feet of iron and clay, it's a divided kingdom. But then at the end of this prophecy, Michael, we have a rock that comes in and just obliterates the whole thing. And
Right.
I think that would be definitely a worthwhile read here in Daniel 2, again, to see history unfold right before our very eyes. I mean, it's accounted for here. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom. So there's no doubt about it. This is a heavenly
Yes.
kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms,
Mm.
and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands. Sounds like somebody we know, doesn't it?
Mhm.
And that it broke into pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure.
Oh God.
Whew.
That of course one part of that people will not be a part of the strength of this kingdom.
Mm,
What he's saying there is what Paul said is the genealogies of all of this is ending
yeah.
where it comes to people.
Yep.
The genealogy of who people are is from that point forward unimportant.
Mm,
That nobody's predestined. It's not being handed to other people. And who's next in line? There is no next in line. Isn't that what that says, Daniel?
yeah. There's none.
That there's no next in line. So the complete, after going through all of these details about God being in charge, it's almost like God's in charge of their bowel movements. I mean, it's these people, their lives were completely controlled by the Spirit of God and by Christ, we might say.
Mm-hmm.
And like you have pointed out, it says, no, this was the dream, and it's all very clear.
Yeah.
And then as you look at here's the important part. This was spoken before this history took place.
Yes.
Now we look back and we see, as it was interpreted by Daniel, we see that this is, and he said this is what they are, but you've got to remember they had not happened yet at this time of this dream.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar, the gold head was all that was there.
Mm,
The silver arms were not in place.
right.
The body of brass was not in place. The legs of iron were not in place. The clay and iron mixed feet were not in place. But each one were told that before the only one that existed at the time was the gold head.
Mm-hmm.
But he explains, as sure as Nebuchadnezzar was the gold head, these were specific people and persons and countries and authorities that would come. And all you got to do, folks, is read a history book. It's all exactly there.
Yeah.
Daniel's work actually finished at the start of this silver comes in with the rise of Persia.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
So, and the Persian Empire was a divided kingdom, right? And and that's why it has two arms. It's the silver and the silver. Each arm, it was not a kingdom that was all together in one. So it comes up with two arms, but it explains all of that in these passages.
And then, the next couple chapters, Michael, in the book of Daniel, just really kind of walk us through this process of Daniel. We see how King Nebuchadnezzar made this golden image. I think he got gold in his head. And he made this big image, and he commanded that everyone would come out and bow down to it. And Daniel, and of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused not to bow down. And then the punishment was that they were thrown into the fire. And he said, "Hey, you remember the preachers preaching that one? Did I not throw 3 men into that fire? And there's a 4th man in the fire." I think Oral Roberts had that message, something about the 4th man.
Like unto the Son of God. Yeah, well, he was there.
Yeah.
Manifestation of Christ.
I was just going to say, an appearance of the Christ. And then, of course, this goes on. There's a little more history between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, and then Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den. Time and time again, God is trying to show Nebuchadnezzar that he's not in control.
Yeah.
That he is under an authority. He is an authority under authority. And Nebuchadnezzar kept trying to rise up above God. He kept trying to rise up above that authority that he was under. But it didn't work for him, because every time he came against Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it just proved him time and time again. There's a greater authority than you. There's a greater power than you.
Yeah. King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
And then, of course, as Ethan pointed out, is that now we see this rise of the Persian Empire. And the Persians were the ones that came in and they overthrew the Babylonian Empire, as was told to Nebuchadnezzar would happen. And this is when Daniel and all of Israel went back to Jerusalem and started to rebuild the city and to rebuild the temple. This was the start of the 70-week prophecy that Daniel told about. So we have this history walking out, not only the history unfolding, but also a prophetic image of what was to come. Then you have the 70 weeks of Daniel that we've been talking so much about. And then past that point, Daniel begins to prophesy more clearly about the rise and the fall of these empires.
It is just amazing. We even have details, historical details. I found this out, speaking of genealogies, and I can always find a way to bring my genealogy into any conversation. But I found out that I was somewhere between 1% to 3% Sephardic Jew. I didn't know what a Sephardic Jew was. And then I found out the word Sephard or Sephardic means Spain. Mm. So this was the Spanish part of this. When Nebuchadnezzar came in, many people left, and they continued to leave throughout his reign. And part of them went into, this was such a distant time ago that they now can identify that group of Jews by DNA, this Sephardic portion of them. They crossed across North Africa and came to the peninsula there at Portugal and Spain, and they crossed there and they settled and they had incredible kingdoms. Ethan and I were going through this, and we found out that during the Dark Ages, Spain was having a golden age. Mm. So, see, our view of history is so narrow, being the people that we are. But here we had a golden age. But the golden age was under Islamic control, and the Jewish people had to pay a tax like everybody else did that wasn't Islamic. But they even had their philosophers. They had philosophers from the Jewish community that were publishing their work and owning their own businesses and building homes and all of these things. So then I know that my ancestors was a part of that group. And so one of my ancestors came out of the Babylonian Empire because of Nebuchadnezzar. And then in Obadiah chapter 1, verse 20, Obadiah prophesies about this dispersia, this dispersion that started with this, and the dispersion, there's been several dispersions, but this dispersion was from the Babylonian Empire into Spain. And the book of Obadiah talks to these the dispersia, and he speaks specifically to those that are of Sephard. So my talk about able to extend genealogy. I can show you my genealogy in Obadiah chapter 1, verse 20. That the people they're talking about there in the Jewish group, the Sephard, that's my ancestry. Mm. I don't know which one of them was, but I know they were a part of this group, and I know that the Sephardics were a very small element of the Jewish community. but they lived and thrived and prospered. So, but the point being, see, I could take that and tell you, see there, I'm not in prophecy, folks. But you could see how anybody could take that. But my ancestors are in prophecy, but that entire thing was brought to an end. It's irrelevant what happened as far as biblical history and spiritual fulfillment. It's irrelevant what happened to the Sephardic Jews from that point to where that they, one or two of how many ever became a part of my ancestry. We also found out while we was doing that ancestry that Christopher Columbus, they've got his home there in Ethan went there, looked up at the window and everything. And then they did the genealogy of some of the descendants, and they found out that Christopher Columbus was part Jewish.
Mm.
Yeah.
So he was Sephardic Jew.
So that means I was just staring at a pile of stones.
Yeah. History tried to tell you something that wasn't true, right? Because Christopher Columbus was not Italian. He was Sephardic. And his grandparents were full-blooded Sephardic Jews. And then in 1492, that began another great dispersia. So 1492, not only did Columbus sail the ocean blue, but they also began to remove the Jews from Spain. And half the boat that Columbus came over on as a Sephardic Jew, part Sephardic Jew, was filled with Sephardic Jews. And because they were trying to get out the very same year. Now, all of this is after history, after fulfillment of the cross, but you can see the implications and the waves that this created in the development of modern civilization. I mean, to think, when Ethan and I found that out about that there was a golden age going on during the Dark Ages, just a few hundred miles south. Jesus. I mean, you can go to Europe where the Dark Ages were and get on a train and wind up in the evening where the Golden Ages were.
Mm.
Our little side trip there, I just want to show you how precise these prophecies were about the people and what happened to them, even to the point of acknowledging that part of them went to Spain.
One more aspect of that, Michael, and we've been talking the last 2 weeks about who is the Antichrist, and these real people, these real kings, these real horns, these real positions of authority that were in place that Christianity has mistakenly come in and used to come in with a fictional character and try to say, that little horn, that's the fictional character, the Antichrist. The prince who is to come, that's a fictional character, the Antichrist. This abomination of desolation, that's this fictional character, the Antichrist. The son of perdition, the lawless one, the man of sin. This one is the fictional character, the Antichrist. One here right in Daniel chapter 11, that this king of the north, and actually if you read through Daniel chapter 11, there's many kings of the north that come and go in that chapter. And no, this king of the north, he's the Antichrist. We talked about how there were 8 legs to this table. Number one, we disproved the table to start with, but then we went one by one and we're looking at the legs, and one of them is this king of the north. And Michael, this is, and Ethan, this is one of the characters that started in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. This is about the Greek Empire, and a very famous one that you guys watched a show on last night, Alexander the Great.
That is Alexander the Great. There is no doubt about it. And if you read down about 5 verses, I think that's in verses 3 and 4, that he is identified. And then later on in that chapter, it says that this authority in particular will have not the desire for women. A lot of people don't like it. And if you have any homophobia in you at all, you're not going to like watching the historical account of Alexander's life, because he had one lover throughout his life from his youth all the way through, and he had and there's indications of others, but he has. It's very clear that Alexander the Great was a homosexual man.
Mm.
Now, let me tell you what I did with that. Because I was told that that was the Antichrist, do you know what I got up in front of people and said as a, quote, delivered homosexual? I said that the Antichrist was going to be gay. Now, you think I haven't contributed to the ignorance and the stupidity? And everybody's, their mouth dropped open. And I mean, it was like, oh my God, and it says it right there. If this is the Antichrist, then this says the Antichrist is gay.
Mm.
The problem is, this is not about the Antichrist. Now, why did you call the Antichrist a fictional person? Will you explain that to us?
As we looked at every verse in the Bible that uses the term Antichrist, what we determined is, number one, it is not an individual person. Number two, it's not a power that's going to rise in some future unfolding. According to 1 John and 2 John, the only 4 places in the entire Bible that use the term Antichrist, that term is associated with people who just denied that Jesus came in the flesh. And so this character that Christianity has made up, this fictional character that Christianity had made up, is nowhere in the Bible. And all of these characters that they associate with that fictional character are true, real, historical people who had a part to play in the 1,000-year reign of Christ, within prophecy, within the 70 weeks of Daniel. They had a place, they had a part to play. They played the part, and they're dead, and they're gone, and there's no future implication to that whatsoever.
Just incredible. Ethan, did you have anything?
Why am I just now learning this?
That's been Ethan's thing for the last couple of days. Is just he told me, says I'm having to deal with some anger here. I can't believe that I was told this stupidity.
Mm.
He got fed ignorance, and it made him stupid. But when truth came in, I can tell you, when we started studying this, you would not have known what happened to Ethan by hearing the elements of the historical context of this. He was no longer ignorant. He stopped ignoring things because he thought he knew what he was looking at. And once he stopped being ignorant, the stupidity left. And I'm telling you, he and I and you, all of us together, we've been learning at lightning speeds. It's just been, and all we've had to do is look, well, what's that? Well, it says this. Wow, that's that. And wow, that. And here's history. And then we sat down and watched all 4 of Alexander the Great. That's on, is that Netflix, or it's on Netflix? I really encourage you. You talk about, now the historians, you'll see the historians, it's a docudrama. And you'll see the documentary part of this, try to figure out the ego of the character of Alexander the Great. Mm-hmm. You will so be able to see how that this was not Alexander the Great and his ego and his character. This was a supernatural power in charge of this man's existence.
And as you said at the beginning of the show, opposite to what the preachers are doing, instead of removing the history from the spiritual, they remove the spiritual from the history. in
Yes.
the Hosorian context.
Yeah, and
Wow.
man, I tell you what, if you do not keep that historical framework, the acetate that I used to talk about, how in school we'd have an acetate, and then it'd be a map, and then we'd have an acetate that had other things, but it put it within the parameters of that picture we were looking at. And if you do not accept the historical of the spiritual and the spiritual of the historical, you're going to be ignorant and stupid. You're not going to be able to learn. I mean, it's like taking a picture of the United States and trying to fit an acetate of all of the locations in Australia and putting it down over, and you can see through all the parts except the cities, and try to put it over the United States. It's going to be a confusing mess. You're going to try to figure out where Perth is on the west coast of the United States. You're going to be trying to figure out where Sydney, Australia is, somewhere down near South Carolina. I mean, that is how important it is that the overlay of history, defining the spiritual, and the spiritual that is guiding the history.
Wow. So good. I think we are all in awe of this understanding. And
Well, we really are.
I just think about all the teachers that taught me. What I realize is, yes, they were ignorant, and they forced that ignorance into my young little brain.
I know.
And here I stood confused about these things for so long. And all we have to do, again, it's amazing, Michael and Ethan, what we do in the Gospel Revolution is just read. We just read the story. We don't add anything to it. We don't take anything away. We just read the story, and we just stand amazed.
Well, we would love to tell you how brilliant we are, but we don't. I don't have a clue. The fact is, all we have done is followed the instructions of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
About how to learn. He said the Hebrew scriptures were all about him. If you want to know about him, he said, you think that you can find righteousness and life in those scriptures, but they're not about you. The scriptures are about me.
Mm-hmm.
And once you accept that and you do what he says do, and what the same thing that Paul passed on to the Bereans, and it said that after they heard him teach, they went to check this out with the scriptures. And folks, that wasn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That wasn't written. It wasn't First Peter, Second Peter, James, Jude, Revelation. It was none of those. When they searched the scriptures, they searched the Hebrew scriptures, and we have those today, and very grateful for them. And the accuracy, I hope that if you have not heard them, we go in this 1,000, into the accuracy of the Hebrew scriptures, because you've got to know the validity of what's being said to rely on the document.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to know the reliability of the document. Everything that you accept as fact comes from a predetermined. If it's a fact, it's already predetermined. It's already done. That's what facts are. Facts aren't what might happen. Facts are what happened. But if you don't know where to look for what happened, you don't even have a basis for understanding. So we took Jesus seriously, and I swear, and guys, you correct me if I'm wrong, that is the only thing we did.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot. I'm a high school dropout. And I mean, we got two more educated men than myself here, and this has not been. It's like one brain, though. So it's very hard to say, well, Daniel saw this, or Ethan saw that, or Michael saw this, because it's just so one brain like.
Mm-hmm.
that we honestly, and you guys know, I do everything I can do to give credit to where credit is due, just like we did with Robert May and Brad Crooks. They were the first one to introduce me to this concept of Paul's ministry being called. And I will always let people know these are the guys who tried to interrupt my ignorance. But I was ignorant because I thought something that was not true. And suddenly, but you know how long it took me to learn this? After that was gone, it took me a split second to learn every bit of this about Paul. It was already there. I just refused to let it be applicable to what it was saying. I knew what it said, and I sung and danced. You go back and hear the. I remember teaching and how that Paul said in the beginning of Romans, how that he was called, he was special, and then later on he says, "You're called." So I said, "See, Paul wasn't saying that he was called and special. He was saying he was called with us." Folks, I know how to skate through something if I need. And that was my paradigm, so that's the way I explained it. But that is not a true statement that I made. All of the tapes that you hear, or audios, or any of these, you're going back in any of the decades, you're going to hear me claim that Paul had no higher calling or different calling than you and I do today. I now know that's a lie. So I was unable to even read. I mean, it's everywhere about this. Jesus affirmed it. Paul affirmed it. Time after time after time. And then we even have the Hebrew scriptures affirming it. This alignment of the tribe of Benjamin, the issue we went through about Saul and Paul. So much of it is just so impactful. But you have to be ready to be proven wrong. And you might wonder, I wonder if I'm one of those people that are willing to be proven wrong. If what you hear somebody else say causes you to become defensive, you are not a person who's willing to learn. I'm telling you, I remember those feelings, and they just don't exist anymore. I can hear, and Ethan was telling me this the other day. I don't know if he remembers, but we were talking about how different it is in the gospel. And one of the points that Ethan was bringing out was his response to people that he disagrees with. And he says, I used to just become unglued. I'd have to get away from those people. But now it's just.
Bring it in, bring it on.
Yeah. It's like I might learn something,
That's why I turned on Perry Stone last night.
Exactly. And he turned Perry Stone back up. It's like, why do you want to listen to Perry Stone? Well, he wants to listen to Perry Stone because he wants to listen to how wrong he was. And until you are able to accept that other people think things that you do not think, then you are not prepared to learn. So what can place somebody in that position of learning? The only thing I know that did it for me is the same thing I know that you guys would say is the gospel. It was the equality of understanding that there's not one better than the other spiritually. We have to start at a basis. I mean, last night when we finished watching Alexander the Great, this 23-year-old young man said to me at that last battle of Alexander's at the end of all of this, that should have been the last war fought on earth. And it just blew me away because he's right. You can't have wars and everything coming up. Jesus saying, there'd be wars and rumors of wars. He's talking about history. He's not talking about the future. He was telling them the way it's been, but that's not a sign of the end. That's not the end. What happened with Alexander is not the end. What happened with Herod the Great, that's not the end either. You just please, it's important to know where the end is. The rock. So what we wind up with is a rock that hits this from the feet of clay and iron. Now, what about the feet of clay and iron? Now, we can go down through this, but it says what it is. So the one that everybody is, now a lot of people take the head of gold and totally ignore what it says there, Daniel. But if you just take what this says, we get all the way down to the feet of brass and or iron and clay. And that's where everybody has a notion as to what that is. And the 10 toes, where the 10 toes is, blah, blah, blah. And, man, I tell you, once you accept that what you're looking at this through is God's perspective, not ours. This is God's perspective, and whatever he sees the clay and the iron as, that's what it is. So I know I sent a bunch of stuff to you yesterday evening. And again, Ethan and I were, after we had done that hour and a half together, hour and 45 minutes or more, we continued on, and we were still going down through the body of this vision. And so we got down to the feet of that are made up of iron and clay. So that's what we're going to discuss here at the very end of this. All right, so we are down to the feet. Now, the thing that you have to, let's look at a couple of perspectives about the feet. The feet of iron and clay, it's almost like you're supposed to have your foundation is supposed to be strong, right? But this vision is of an inverted stability. It goes from extremely stable to completely unstable. Gold to silver to bronze to iron to clay. So you are degrading the substance of each kingdom as it comes. It's all listed there, including Alexander the Great. And so now we're down to these feet. There's something that you need to know about iron and clay. They don't mix. Clay does not adhere to iron. Iron does not adhere to clay. So if it's made up of clay and iron, it doesn't mean, but see, we, in our minds, we see something becoming, you can glue things together and stuff, but you can't glue clay to iron.
And it says that.
Yeah.
In verse 43.
Tell us what that is.
And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with merry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another.
Yeah.
Even as iron is not mixed with clay.
Yeah. So, so how bright was I? All the thing we can do, folks, is read. And even sometimes when we get an insight, how many times have I said this to both of you, is all we had to do is read a little further. That's how many times that happened on this program. That, that Daniel or I, either one, will go into something like, wow, this. And then we keep reading. It's like, okay, all we had to do is read. So now we're down to this, the feet of brass. But you've got to realize that this is culminating at the end of the 70 weeks of Daniel. It's also culminating at the end of the 1,000-year reign. That's where this history brings this vision of these kingdoms. It brings it right straight down to the life of Christ. Now, if we take this as during the period of the life of Christ up to the cross, then you stop and say, well, you don't have to figure out what the iron is. It tells us about the iron being Roman Empire. So we don't have to figure out who the iron is. But the only part of it's left is to figure out who was the clay. Now, I don't know why anybody that had a Bible in their hands would wonder who was the clay. I think we have comments by Isaiah that said, "Thou, O Lord God, you are the potter, we are the clay." Isaiah, Daniel, Paul gave us this understanding. Who are you, you pots of clay? Who are you to say that God should have made me one way or another way? And then Ethan picked up on this. They made us the vessels of destruction. That was the destruction.
Michael, now I'm seeing the exact terminology used in this prophecy of the image. In verse 41 says, whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron.
Wow. So it even calls it potter's clay. Who's the potter? Isaiah said, you are the potter, we are the clay.
Wow.
I mean, how many rabbits do you have to chase after until you accept what's sitting right beside you? And this, Ethan's just blowing my mind right now. I mean, by just reading the rest of this, it's like, duh, once again, right in the middle of explaining, suddenly, all you have to do is read another verse. He didn't just say it was clay. He said it was potter's clay. We are told who the potter is, and we're told who the clay is. This is potter's clay. This takes us all the way back to so many stories in Potter's house and the vessels and all of this stuff. But the thing of it was, and this is the part of the historical that blew me away as I started getting into this. Here, the second temple is being built in the Roman Empire. It's in its last phases of construction while Jesus is alive.
Mm-hmm.
The possibility that Jesus and Joseph both would have worked on, it's almost impossible that they didn't work on the temple. They were Jewish people. I don't think Gentiles were allowed to work on this temple. That it would have been something done by Jewish people alone. And why would not people of the tribe of Judah not be working on the temple? Especially when they're described, both of them, as being master craftsmen at carpentry. It does, when it says carpenter, it just doesn't mean, sawing a two before. This was a craftsman. They were craftsmen. And there were a lot of craftsmen that took part of this. So when you look at this, I'm telling you folks, all of you out there, if you don't all already know, the mixture of the clay and the iron, what that is, then it's because you've learned something that's untrue and you can't hear what's being said to you right now. The clay was Israel. The iron was Rome. They were two kingdoms that could not fuse together at all. This was the kingdom that had come down under the Christ. Now the Christ has manifested during this feat of clay and this feat of iron, and he is a part of both of them. He is in the Roman Empire. He is also a part of the clay. And then, through the death, burial, and resurrection, a verse that is accepted widely to be Christ, the rock, that comes and hits these feet of clay and iron, and all of those kingdoms now become completely irrelevant.
Mm.
Alexander is now irrelevant. My Sephardic ancestry is irrelevant. Herod is irrelevant. We have come up with a rock that, guess what happens to that rock? It grows into a mountain.
Verse 44 and 45. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed.
Yeah.
And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Verse 45. For much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake into pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold.
Wow.
The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure.
It's certain and it's sure. You read those to us earlier, and it certainly was a point to repeat it. Because now you heard those verses, and you probably aren't stupid anymore. You are probably able to hear what Ethan just read. Before, because of what you were told about this, you weren't able to hear that. Maybe even when Daniel quoted it just a few minutes ago. But this time, you heard it. Why are you able to hear it? Because you were able to set aside all preconceived notions about this and simply accept what it says. Folks, this is not my job to determine who is the clay. It's not my job. This is God's job here. This is God that put this. Watch Alexander the Great and see if God, the King of Kings, was not over this guy and bringing things to a conclusion. It's astounding. But the Rock of Ages, how many times do we have Christ listed as the Rock? How many times do we have the Jewish people listed as the clay? How many times do we have the Roman Empire's been identified here as iron? So the only thing we had to do is accept what God says is the clay. And it's potter's clay. He is the potter. We are the clay. Let's think about that for about 2,000 years and think we can figure it out. And that's what we've done. Now, why have we done that for 2,000 years? Because of endless genealogy.
Come on.
Unfinished prophecies, unfinished law, unfinished sin, unfinished righteousness. Now, if you think that those feet and that clay is something else other than what it says and what we just related to, it says that the rock that hits it is going to establish a kingdom that will last forever. That means you do not believe that the kingdom of God is even in existence yet. If those feet have not been destroyed, along with the brass, along with the silver, along with the gold, if it hasn't all reached its end in one man, Christ Jesus, you do not believe that the kingdom of God is here. The eternal kingdom. You're waiting on a kingdom. And that's why the disciples, that's why we have this division between Paul and the apostles. They're still waiting on that kingdom too. To the point where that Peter misquotes the scriptures and says, oh, well, you guys are on to me about this, about Christ coming back. But now you get off my case because the scriptures say that with God, 1,000 years is a day and a day is 1,000 years. And you lied, Peter. You lied. That's not what the scripture says. What the scripture says is once 1,000 years has passed, that's a long time for man. But for God, that's just a day. That's what the scriptures say. And to say that God's saying a day is like 1,000 years and 1,000 years like a day and link that to prophecy? But folks, Peter using that is one of the most defining, defiant, most misguided, most misleading statements in the entire New Testament to throw us off from understanding about the finished work of the cross. Now, I appreciate the disciples and what they were called to do. They were not called to do what Paul was called to do. Now, Daniel, right now, you just kind of look like you're stunned.
Well, this is beautiful. You know, as Paul said, that these unending genealogies, ministers questions, ministers searching, and for us, the search is over. You know, we've discovered the end. We have found it, and for all of you who are still searching, we implore you, as Paul does, to find the end of the genealogies. Find the end of all of this in Christ, in the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. And I'd say I promise you, but Paul promises you, the end of this ministry of searching, the ministry of questions will be over. Will you stop learning? No. Will you come to understand it all immediately? No. But as the three of us are on this journey, you can join us on that journey too.
Yeah, and we appreciate it, guys. So Ethan, tell us what's happening to you. Can you describe what's happening?
I'm just drowning. It's just everyday concepts that have been floating in my head for years, misconceptions.
All the way back to church days.
Yeah. And now it took 1.5 hour conversation going into one piece of imagery that I had so many misconceptions about. And after that hour and a half, I mean, just an explosion of information. Yeah.
Yeah. Or drowning in information. I mean, that's what Ethan is sharing with you. For those of you who don't know, I met Ethan when he was 17 years old and in the gym. And there was one of those moments, and there's been an unending friendship. And the moment he started learning the gospel, his Pentecostal mind, raised by parents that were ultra Pentecostal, East Tennessee Mountain Pentecostal, and then to meet me, and I was the epitome of everything that was condemned, and sharing the gospel with him. And he had not yet received the baptism in the Holy Ghost. He hadn't been able to speak in tongues yet. And so in front of the owner of the gym there, we were in the office. And so Ethan, after being raised by Pentecostals, raises the question, so what is this speaking in tongues? Because he truly was, I mean, he hadn't got the blessing. You know why he didn't get the blessing? Because he told the truth. All the rest of us had to pretend and go along with it. I had a magnificent, quote, Holy Ghost baptism. It was very spiritual. But it doesn't mean it was real. Folks, you can practice voodoo. It seems very real. But it doesn't mean it's truth. So that was Ethan at 17. He just turned 23. And my goodness, I feel, I told him last night, I said, your life's ruined,
Oh, hey, I speak in tongues all the time now.
Yeah, I mean, if he wants to, he just, it's so amazing. Yeah. So he went, so that's what I did. So he asked us, what is tongues? And I said, it's a subject in the Bible. But he was taught that you could only speak in tongues under the unction. You had to be in church and, the Spirit hit you and all that. And I said, yeah, I can speak in tongues. And he looked like he had been hit with a bolt of lightning. And because he had heard some of the language that I use when I'm working out. And yeah, I have a working out language. I don't only have a heavenly language, I have a working out language. And I try not to use my working out language in other places. But so this was a collision that happened in his brain at 17. And now, goodness gracious, with Daniel, with you and Ethan, and I could go down through a list. Lisa, Jackie. I shouldn't have started the list because I can't name everybody. But you just have there's no way anybody could perceive where I am in this. That I went for decades not ever hearing the gospel come out of somebody else's mouth. Decades. And to hear you guys, oh my goodness. Life's complete. And if you want to help this gospel revolution to keep going, send us a blank check and we'll fill it in for you. Just sign it. We promise we'll pray and ask God how much to fill it in.
And so it is, we must leave you, family and friends. If you'd like to know anything about the gospel revolution or you want to send in that blank check, then call Michael on
832-318-9339.
or go to www.gospelrevolution.com and hit the connect link. You can find us on your favorite social media network, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Please be sure to hit that subscribe, share, and like button on whatever platform you are listening. Now it's good night from Daniel Rouse in the frozen tundra.
And it's good night from Michael Lilborn Williams, right here in East Tennessee. East Tennessee, goodness gracious. Ethan's here, so that's East Tennessee, right? Here in North Middle Tennessee, and just really enjoyed myself. How was this first go around for you, Ethan?
It was a lot of fun. Looking forward to the future with you guys.
Looking forward to many more. Exactly. All right, guys, we love you. You just heard a teaching. I cannot say this any plainer. You just heard a teaching that has never been taught on planet Earth about the culmination of the rock hitting the feet of iron and clay. And if you can come up with, like I say, we don't have to reach a definition about the iron. The scriptures tells us that. But the scriptures also tell us who the clay is. Repeatedly.
We sure hope that you enjoyed today's Powercast. And remember, we'll be here to do the same thing all over again next week, only
better.
Since you're knocking on the door, you're begging to come in, yeah. Unaware that all the while love's been knocking from within. You are the love you seek, a perfect yet unique, righteous, holy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. When you feel lost and alone, staring at the unknown, and these words be the compass that guides you right. We are one, we are love, we are. Know where you gotta be, nothing to complete. It's not a thing that you need, you're the love. Just remember to breathe and take a second off. Look, I'm just trying to remind you that you're perfectly divine, flawlessly designed. When you feel lost and alone, staring at the unknown, let these words be the compass that guides you right. We are one, we are love, we are. Yeah, yeah. We are love.
deconstructing religion and barbecuing the sacred cows of Christianity before your very eyes. You are listening to
The Gospel Revolution.